Thanks for joining me this afternoon. It's nice to be back doing these in person. I'm going to hope that I remember how to use the clicker that I've got in my hand. I've been practicing for the last 15 minutes because I'm used to just like you actually are sitting at the keyboard, but this is so far away. I forgot what lecterns are like for a tall person. It's like, it's going to be really awkward because I have when I'm doing some live coding, I'm going to be just hunched over but we'll make it work. And it's coming to the end of the first day of NDC Melbourne. So thanks for joining me, and I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. My name's Powell, and I work for Microsoft as part of the developer advocacy team, or the cloud advocacy team. I've got to get better at saying that we're cloud advocates, not developer advocates, because we have IT pros and Power Platform advocates and people of that nature. So we're not just developers, we're covering all the things that we do. But I'm of a developer background. I've been doing web development for long enough that I'm not going to admit it properly on stage because I know this is being recorded, but long enough to have seen quite a lot of changes in the industry. I've had the pleasure of working with a large number of different text editors over that time, and that's why I wanted to do a talk about VS Code because it's the one that I'm loving the most at the moment. But I've used everything from Vim and Emacs, Jed for like old school Unix people. That's kind of where I started. Pico and Nano, those were the editors that I used at university because that was modern technology back then. Oh wait, no, I am now starting to date myself. All the way through things like Sublime, Atom, Visual Studio, the full edition, and obviously more recently VS Code. And because a lot of what I do is web development, like VS Code really fits into that sort of space and the kinds of things that I'm doing, and I like it as an editor. If you want to reach out to me or follow me on social media, those are my contact details. Like if you've got any questions that you don't want to ask at the conference or get caught on video asking me, shoot me an email or send me a DM on Twitter, whatever the case may be. I want to make sure that I can answer as many questions as I can so that you get the most out of the content that I've got today. But you're not just here to listen to 60 minutes of me talk about myself and my social media presence and how amazing that is. As much as I like to talk about myself for 60 minutes, it's not really why you're here. We're here to talk about VS Code, and I think it is the most powerful editor that we've got at the moment. Whether you're new to the software industry and like you're just coming out of a boot camp or just finishing university or cross-skilling, or you've been using editors for as many years as I have, I think that there's going to be something in this talk for you. I don't profess to know everything that you can do with VS Code, but I'm going to show off some of the things that I think are the best features of it and some of the hidden gems that people have within, that people don't necessarily know about within VS Code. But to get started, I just want to make sure that everyone is familiar enough with VS Code. So like I said, I know that there's people out there that they're just getting started in the industry and they might not have had much time with a software like this. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And also the terminology that I use to describe things does actually make sense because I think I know all the things correctly, but I will probably mislabel some things. So you'll know when I say something like, well, I've never heard of that. And then, yeah, this is a lap around, like a very quick lap around VS Code. So this is the editor for anyone that hasn't seen it. I've just opened one of my open source projects using a remote extension, and this is showing obviously a chunk of HTML. But let's break down the stuff that's in the editor. So across the top we've got the title bar. I think pretty much every windowed application has one of them. It's got our menu system, file, edit, et cetera. But it's also got some contextual information about where I am. Like the folder that I've got open, the file that I've got open, the status of that file, whether it's a dirty file, so I've got unsaved changes against it, things like that. But that's entirely customizable. Like if you want to put some emojis in there because you just love having emojis in every aspect of your life, you can edit the way that the title bar is going to appear in VS Code because it's customizable to make it the editor that you want it to be. We've then got our sidebar on the left-hand side. Well, yes, I'm not used to actually seeing the people. I'm like, what? the screen's flipped because no, it is, yes, it is the left. I'm going to do that a bunch, I reckon, because I'm just like, my brain doesn't know where things are at the minute. And this Explorer will show you all the sorts of things that, like your file structure, which is what it's defaulted to there. It's where we get to our debugging information. So if we're setting breakpoints and putting watch variables because we're debugging the project, we get to extensions. Extensions can add to this sidebar on the side. I've got a couple of extensions there, such as Azure, Docker, and a couple others that we'll have a look at a little bit later. Then across the bottom, we have just like generic information about the editor that other extensions have jumped in and put there. So in the bottom left-hand corner, it says WSL Ubuntu, because this example was opened from a remote extension against WSL, because I'm working on Windows, but I'm actually doing all my development in Linux. I actually don't do any development on Windows, but I run Windows as my primary operating system. It's all done through WSL, or WSL2 more accurately. And then other information, what Git branch I'm on, are there any errors or warnings, what account that I'm signed in as, all the way through to like the line endings, the file language that's been picked up. And again, this stuff you can turn off. So if you're someone that might have, has some neurodiversities around attention deficit, you can turn off some of this stuff because maybe that's too much information and you're like, oh, what's it telling me about errors, or what's it telling me about the file encodings? Why is that changing? You can customize that to make it work for the kinds of workflows that you've got. Then I've got the terminal popped open here. This is it's popped with a bash terminal because I'm on a Linux environment. It's a terminal. I can execute commands. I tend to use, I run my Git from a command line, so I'll do all that through there rather than the Git extension built into VS Code. Run npm to do the npm-y things and all that kind of stuff. We can have as many terminals as we want open. It's also got, this is where we get to like errors and warnings. So if you've got like a linter running or it's a compiled language project, so you're not writing JavaScript, it'll give you like errors about the compiler state because you've missed a semicolon somewhere or you haven't closed the parentheses or whatever the case may be. Debug output if you're running in debug mode, all that kind of stuff. And then we actually have we have an editor surface. So like there's a whole bunch of stuff I told you about VS Code that's there, but it's also a text editor. Like amazing. There's a place where you can go and edit a file. This is a HTML file, syntax highlighting, again, like all the kinds of things you expect from a modern text editor. And lastly, on the side, we have the mini-map. So this is like a 1,000-foot view of the code file that you've got open. This is obviously a fairly short code file, so it's only bunched up in the top. But if you had like a 10,000-line code file, you can use that to quickly navigate up and down a very large file. I mean, not that anyone would have like a 10,000-line code file. Like, no, like I've never worked on projects that have got 10,000 lines of JavaScript or anything like that. No, that's bad. Don't do that. Okay, so now that so feel free to shout out questions at any point in time. So yes, I see one just back there.
Can I just say, really cool, massive log files.
Ah, yes.
Open in VS Code. VS Code says, I can't open this, it's too big. Let me restart in a different mode so I can access more memory, and it can still show a 2 gig log file.
Excellent. So just for the recording and for anyone that didn't hear down the back, VS Code, yeah, it's great for opening files that are large. And yeah, a good example is a log file that it's an enormous file, and it will offer to open it in a mode to be memory optimized for dealing with large files. I think it essentially does a chunked read of that file. So yeah, you're not actually trying to load 2 gigs of like log file into memory and then accidentally syntax highlight it because it goes, oh, maybe that's markdown. You're like, no, it's definitely not. And yeah, so it will optimize for that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a good tip and one that I'm going to steal for next time I do this presentation. All right, so. I'm a keyboard person. Like I don't tend to use the mouse much. Like before the pandemic, at least, I was predominantly on a laptop, so I had a touchpad. And anyone that spent extended periods of time with just a touchpad knows that you're not using a touchpad. You're either going to buy an external mouse, or you're just going to learn every single keyboard shortcut that you can. And that's what I kind of set myself out to do. So I use as many keyboard shortcuts as I can, and I find for my workflows, that's a really good way to be productive in VS Code. So let's kill slides for a moment and actually jump over to VS Code. And let me find the right VS Code instance, because I've got like a heap of them open here. Now, demos will take a variety of instances, so I've got them all open. Feel free to read forward in the notes and then just doze off while I read through them and go through them. They are there on the screen. But if there is only one keyboard shortcut that you ever learn from VS Code, it is Control-P. I'm on Windows. If you're on Mac or have a different keyboard layout, I think Mac is Command. I'm not sure. It's been a long time since I've used a Mac. But Control-P brings up the command palette. Control-Shift-P brings up, Control-Shift-P brings up the actions list. So this is all the things that you can do with inside of VS Code, from menus, from right-click actions, from extensions, and things that actually don't have anywhere else that you can get to them except via this section. And the first thing I'm going to turn on is screencast mode. So screencast, oh, yep.
Does that mean Command-Shift-P is a superset for stuff you get Command-P?
Yeah, so Command-P is like the base point, and then there's a bunch of things you can do off that. One of them, if you put a greater than symbol, it goes into the actions list, which is what we had there. So if I do Control-P and then a greater than sign, I then get that filtered down list.
What's the difference between commands and actions?
So from here, this is default to like a file searcher. So I can type in, like README, and I can find a README file. But then if I was to put in question mark, it will show me all the other things that I can do off of here. So it's the primitive help. If I do like an @ symbol, I can find symbols within files, hash to go to line and stuff like that. Most people do remember Control-Shift-P because that drops you into the actions, but I always start with Control-P because from there you can then build onto it to get to this list of actions, these lists of things you can do, or you can do a variety of other things. So yeah, good question, and explain the differences there. So I turned on screencast mode, and I find this is a really useful tool when you're doing pair programming, particularly if you're doing it like over a screen share or something like that, because what it does is every key press that you do is then going to appear. You've probably seen that flashing up as I've started typing. So like if I was to do screencast, you'll see that those characters start appearing. I'll leave it on for the duration of this presentation, so as I do keyboard shortcuts, you can see what they are in case I forget to describe what they are. Or say what they are as they're doing it. But yeah, it's just a useful tool, particularly if you're doing some pair programming, so that the person that you're pairing with can see what you're doing. From that, with screencast mode in settings, we'll go to the settings UI. We can actually configure that, because it is like, you can see every character that I'm doing there, screencast. We can adjust some information about that. We can also change the keys that are appearing. So if you only want like the command key, so Control-Alt-Shift, that kind of stuff, so you can filter it down. So maybe it's not verbose. Like if you've got it turned on and running code, it's like just spewing out constantly because yeah, like everything you're doing. But yeah, a good little tip for if you're doing presentations or if you're doing work where you've got other people that will need to see your screen, but they maybe can't see your keyboard, or you don't want them like hovering right over the top of your shoulder. So yes, to the question before about Control-P versus Control-Shift-P, yeah, this brings up a whole bunch of, this is an entry point where you can do everything. So yeah, greater than symbol comes into here. If we were to do the @ symbol, this will find symbols across the entire like folders, set of folders that we've got open. So I'm in a thing with a bunch of markdown files. So it's actually just bringing up markdown headings. But if I was to jump to another project that I've got here, so this is not the project I wanted. As I said, I've got a lot of VS Code instances. That one there. Okay, Control-P and then @. Now this is going to find symbols inside of an F# project here, because I have to, oh sorry, that's in, @ is the current file. Ampersand, no. I've forgotten it off already. Question mark, if we want symbols in the workspace, is hash, that's it. So symbols in the entire workspace. So this will then, as I start typing, so I start type family, and it doesn't find my F# code. Yay! I'm like contractually obliged to show F# in a demo, and this one has failed. Ah, there we go. Person. No. People. Damn it! I can't even find something. Oh, program. Program. There we go. Found something. Yay! I demonstrated that a thing can work the way that I described it would work. Yeah. So this is like if you're working in something that has some form of a type system, or is exposing something that it pretends to be a type system. So like Markdown files. If you're working in like a repository that has Markdown files, you can use symbol finding to go through to the various headings. So like CSS, you can use that to navigate through the CSS file to the selectors that you've got within inside of that. If you're in a stronger type language like a C# project or an F# project or Golang, TypeScript, etc., you can then go through the symbols of those files. But we'll come back to one of these other workspaces that I've got here. Okay, so off Control P, other things we can get to, if I type term, T-E-R-M, this is how I can interact with the terminals that I've got. I don't have any terminals open, so I'll just hit Enter to create a new terminal, and then Control P, term. We'll see that I have the first one there is the terminal that I just created. I can create another terminal, and now I can navigate between those just from some key presses. But they're all called ZSH because that's the shell that it's popped, so I don't actually know what they are. So I can go Control-Shift-P, terminal, and I can actually rename the terminal that I've got currently. If I find that term, rename, there we go, and let's call this NPM. So now, if I go Control-P, term, NPM, I can get to the right terminal that I want to open. So if let's say that I was building on a project that had like a front end and a back end in the same repository. So maybe I've run like an npm start script in both those locations. I could then name the terminal as front end and back end. So then I know which one I can jump to, so I can look at the correct set of log files. So yeah, that's a useful one if you've got a lot of terminals open at the same time. Renaming them just makes it easier to find, and it will fuzzy match as you type into the command palette that's appeared up the top. All right, there's actually no code to run in here, so we'll close out the terminal. The last one that I just want to show off is view. So this is how we can interact with the sidebar, which I've actually got collapsed at the moment. Control B, expand that out. Control B to collapse it again. I also have that on the right-hand side instead of the left-hand side. And that's not just because I am a reformed Visual Studio developer where everything was defaulted to the right. I actually find having the status, the sidebar on the right-hand side more better than the left, because if I'm opening and closing it, so oftentimes if I've got multiple windows open, you start kind of running out of screen real estate. If it's on the left, let me illustrate this. Just right-click and move to the left. The center of focus now shifts every time the sidebar pops in and out because you're actually changing where the left margin is within inside of our editor. That's why I like to have mine on the right. It means that I can easily open and close it, and it's not going to annoy you as the audience watching this talk. And when I'm doing development, it doesn't annoy me because it doesn't annoy me and no one else has to care. Anyway, sorry, we're doing view. So view gives us access to everything that's within the sidebar. My camera was always, it was that side. It's there, floating away. So I can get to like Explorer, search, etc. But I can also get to the subsections of that. So let's go to, say, the outline view that's just popped up at the bottom of the Explorer window there. And that's the outline of the markdown headings that I have within inside of this file. And that's set focus on there that I can navigate through that and jump up and down the headings. So again, more stuff that we can just do straight off the keyboard that gives us access to a particular bit of context within VS Code without having to use the mouse to navigate back and forth between all this stuff. All right, like most editors and bits of software, it's highly configurable in terms of like font size and all that sort of stuff. I've got this zoomed in, just like the entire editor is zoomed in so you can see everything, not just the text being increased. Be aware that if you are increasing font size and then you zoom the editor in, the text will then be magnified because you're actually magnifying the entire editor itself. That one catches me out a little bit. Pretty much that's customizable to look and feel and operate exactly the way that you want it to work. if you want to get to the keyboard shortcut, and there's like so many keyboard shortcuts to memorize, Control KZ, oh, sorry. I'll come back to shortcuts. I want to talk, it was actually Zen mode, which was coming up next. So, got a lovely big 4K monitor at home, and I want to hide everything else and have as much real estate available for the thing that I'm contextually working on at this point in time. Zen mode, Control KZ, pops that up there. It's removed like the stuff around the editor that you maybe don't need to look at all the time, like the status bar's gone, sidebar's like completely disabled and all that sort of stuff. I just have a text editor with the line numbers and the current file. Like I don't even see what other files are open. Control tab obviously gets through all of that. With Zen mode, you can then modify the settings that it has. So if we go Control Shift P, settings, and then Zen mode. We can choose what things are going to be there. It's like, actually, I don't even want line numbers. Only problem is that you've got to go in and out of Zen mode to have that take effect. But now we've got rid of our line numbers, simplified something down. Again, this could be useful for someone that like has attention issues and just wants to get themselves like focused properly in what they're doing. So yeah, and you can configure like the width and stuff of the editor surface, all without settings. Let's drop back out of Zen mode and keep trucking on through. All right. Speaking of settings, so most of the settings are accessible via Control, comma, and that will get you to the UI version of the settings, but not everything can be configured there. Some settings require complex objects to be provided to them. One such is editor rules. So we can get to that by doing settings, 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 and then going to the JSON file. So this is like the raw view of all the settings, and you can see I've got a lot of things that I've customized in my VS Code. I'm going to just go right to the very bottom and find something that I've previously commented out. Editor rules, which is missing a comma. Let's put that back in. So editor rules are used to insert guidelines inside the text editor at particular margin points. So I've popped that in there, and it's a little bit zoomed in, so maybe I'll just change the size of these. Let's go to 40 and 80. See, there's where it starts getting annoying, because now I'm like every character press is appearing for me on screen. Okay, so I put in some editor guides that kind of indicates the character width that within the screen. Now, I don't know how many people came from working on like old terminal programs where you had an 80 character like hard width, and like you didn't make lines that were longer than 80 characters because you didn't have side scrolling, and that was literally the width of the number of characters you could display on your screen. And I know a lot of open source projects that still love to maintain that 80 width characters, and I don't quite understand why, but cool beans. So if we've got like this 4K monitor, like, why would I want to limit it to this much of the screen having like my useful text editor area? Well, one of the reasons why you might want to put in guidelines like this is if you're working with people that are visually impaired. They might be running at a resolution completely different to what you're running, to increase the font size or to increase their editor size so that they can read the same code that you're working on. And having something that is 200 characters across means that they're going to be constantly scrolling back and forth because they require the additional font size or the additional zoom levels on their screen. So having this can help just make a bit more of an accessible code base because you're more aware of limitations that other people within inside of your teams might have, or you yourself if you're in that situation. So that's kind of a use case that I can see for editor guidelines. I mean, other people will have other use cases, no doubt. Maybe they are still building for 80 character width terminals, but yeah, that's something that's there. You can modify color and column width, so you can have as many of these as you want, and you can just rainbow it across one column character at a time if you so desire. I probably wouldn't do that personally. Oops. Let's just comment that out. KC, not K. KC is to insert comments in the language that you're currently in. KU is to uncomment in the language that you're currently in. So that's that one that I was doing there. All right, and another one that I didn't find out until I started writing this talk and researching some of the more nuanced things you can do in VS Code is code actions on save. So I have my editor set up so that it auto-saves after a delay timeout so that I don't actually have to remember to hit Control-S. And it's just like working in a cloud-connected editor. I don't actually have to hit save, and at some point the little floppy disk icon in my computer will go away because it just always is saving. But there are other things you can do on save, and one of those is run a code action, and let's do that by modifying my JavaScript. So this is my JavaScript language profile at the top. I have language profiles for a variety of different languages. That's indicated by the square brackets and the language moniker there. So JavaScript, JSON-C, JSON, TypeScript, React, et cetera, et cetera. And this is something you have to do from the JSON settings. You can't do this through the UI. So we're going to enter and put in a code actions on save. And then we will see what can we do? Well, one of the things we could do is organize imports. And we'll set that to true so that if I come to JavaScript file that I've got here, and let's say that I've got a linting rule in my code base that says that I have to alphabetize the using statements or the import statements in a JavaScript case. Control-S, and that's done that for me. I can just import everything in whatever order that I want and then hit Control-S, and it's reordered them to match the linting rules that we've got within inside of our application. Not a huge thing, like this is something that's available that I can do Control-Shift-P and then do organize imports. But I can just have it on save. Like it's one of those things that now I don't have to think about it. It happens for me. That's the power I find with editor customizations like this is you start doing things that you don't have to commit to muscle memory or you don't have to remember to do. It just does them for you. And it just removes one of those paper cuts that you might have in your life. But I'm going to remove that setting because otherwise I will forget that it's there and be very confused when I open a project and hit Control Save and I've got a huge commit that I have to do. I'm like, I didn't touch the import statements. Cool. So in terms of messing around with the editor, that's some of my favorite additions. Let's just do a quick look at some keyboard shortcuts. These are like the keyboard shortcuts that I think everyone needs to know when working with VS Code. So we've seen Control P to bring up the command palette. If we want to get to the settings, said before, Control comma. If we're working in a language that actually is a programming language, not Markdown, we might get some code actions provided to us. So let me see if I should be able to do that in one of these files over here. Not that file, because that file has a lot of errors and we're going to ignore those. Let's say that I want to turn this into a local variable. You'll see there's a little light bulb that's appeared just underneath the return on line 20. To access that light bulb, Control dot, and then this brings up a bunch of code actions. Here's some quick refactorings. So I can extract that out to a new function. So Control dot, that's how you trigger off that light bulb, so having to mouse over and click it. So that's another good one to commit to muscle memory. Duplicating lines, Alt-Shift up, puts a new line above, and that moves your cursor up. Control-Shift down, puts a new line down, moves your cursor to that. If we want to do like a multi-character select, Control-Shift, and then Control-Shift-Alt, and the direction that we want to expand our cursor, up and down. And then once we've got that cursor, like Control, now I can do a box selection across. So that's just doing box selection based off of the words. On a larger screen, I'll often have multiple files open side by side. Control / will pop that open to the side, and you can do that again and again and again. And we can end up with a lot of open editors, and that's becoming really hard. You can also, there isn't a keyboard shortcut by default, but we can do split, oops, if I can type split, editor down. So we can do vertical as well as horizontal splitting. I have 2 vertical monitors, so I use down splits as well, so that I can have stacked files instead of just side-by-side files. The only thing that annoys me about doing splits like this is that it takes the current file open and puts that there and leaves it. So now I have 2 copies of this markdown file open. Yeah, not quite sure what that's useful for, but that's the way it works. If you want to navigate between editor groups that you've got open, Control-1, Control-2, Control-N for the editor group. So Control-2, pop back there, close off that bottom split. Control-D, the canonical thing that you want to find. Control-D will select the next instance of whatever you've got selected. So in this case, I select the word split, and then it selects that. So now I've got a potentially multi-character selection. Actually, we'll use Control. We go Control-D, and then now we've got multiple characters all over that file. So I could say that I want that lowercase CTRL. So multiple selects like that. And there's a heap more key bindings that I'm not going to cover off today, but you can get that by going to Control-K, Control-R, and that'll open up the key binding reference for the operating system that you're currently on. So obviously this is landed on the Windows one, and you can see that, well, only got about 30 minutes left. I'm not going to cover off all of that because you can see how many there are, and that's not even very well zoomed in. All right. And yeah, a couple other just small ones there, like Alt for Alt up and down swaps the current line up and down. You can use that off a multi-line selection, so I can move like chunks of code. Good for like quick refactorings and things like that. Control up and down moves the editor window, so does that scrolling without you actually having to jump in and scroll. And the last one that I have not been able to commit to memory because I always, every time I go to use it, I'm like, what is it? Control-Shift-P, Control-K-V, Markdown Preview. Like, if you're ever working on docs, Control-K-V, side-by-side, Markdown Preview. I'm like, why can I never remember that one? I can remember all these other obscure ones, but I can't remember how to open Markdown Preview. And I write a lot of Markdown files, and that's the one that I really, really wish I could remember. But, okay. Back to PowerPoint, because that's enough like actually showing something that's not a PowerPoint deck. This is still a technical presentation. We've got to be in PowerPoint. I am an advocate after all. I know there's at least one other advocate in this room, and they're hanging their head in shame. Code snippets. Code snippets are one of my favorite ways to do demos, live coding demos, because you're not here to watch me actually try and type out large chunks of code. I'm going to forget that. I'm going to make a mistake, and someone in the back is going to go, there's an error, and I know what it is. They're going to get a problem, and I want to be the one to tell them. So I use code snippets to cheat by just pre-writing the code and type a little snippet, like step 1, step 2, so I know where I'm up to. Hit enter, and boom, a whole bunch of code appears. But that's great if you're doing presentations, but snippets can be useful for obviously anything that you're doing, and snippets can be used, can be set up with inside of your system. So if you've got common things you're doing across like all your projects, you're commonly working on multiple like React projects, you might have React snippets, but you can also embed them inside of a single Git repo or inside the repository for that project that you're on. We do that with a .vs file, .vs code folder, which I've got right up there in the top. We can put snippets in there, and then they're part of that repo. So this is a way that you could have things that are for a specific project. So you've got maybe a particular pattern for the way you're working with creating classes, or the way that you want to work with a React component, or whatever the case may be. You can set snippets. They can be part of that code base. So whenever someone opens up that in VS Code, they've already got coding conventions that you have in your project ready for them to go. You don't have to tell them then go install all this other additional stuff. Starting to put more of the contextual things for a project with inside of that location. The other problem is that, particularly if you're doing a multi-line snippet, well, it's, let me show you what it looks like. It's like that, and it's really tedious to write, particularly because you've got to put in like line breaks and escapes and all that kind of stuff. Well, I came across this website called snippetgenerator.app, where we can generate code snippets for VS Code or Sublime or They're probably going to have to remove Atom at some point. Oh, poor Atom. If anyone wasn't aware, Atom, it's kind of the precursor to VS Code. It was GitHub's first major editor, and it died like last week or something like that. So, yeah, poor Atom, not VS Code. That's not dead yet. So let's go import React from. See, this is why I don't like writing code, because you've seen how many errors I've just done there. And that will be export const, and we do Control-I because I want something that I can change, and we'll call this component. And that will just be a React component, and then we'll just have it like do a H1. Hi, NDC, Melbourne. We're leaving that spelling mistake in there because I'm too lazy to go back and fix it. Cool, and that's generated me my code snippet there on the side there, or at least the body of that code snippet. I would go then and fill in the language that it's going to be attached to and all that kind of stuff. This is just so much easier. You could grab code out of your existing project because you want to make that as a reusable snippet that anyone can use, copy and paste it in there, gives you the snippet body instead of you having to go, okay, the start of every line is going to need a quote, the end of every line is going to need a quote, I'm going to need a comma on all of them except for the last one, yeah. Something like this, a useful little tool to get started. Now, extensions. VS Code is actually a really simple editor when you first install it. It doesn't do a whole lot. It understands some basic programming language syntax highlighting, like JavaScript and HTML and a few things like that. But the real power of VS Code is extensions. And I'm sure that anyone that's using VS Code has their favorite set of extensions that they're installing everywhere. So I just want to kind of show off a couple of the extensions that I include anytime I set up a new machine or anytime I set up a project with VS Code. These are the extensions that I will always have. And they're going to pop in a random order because that's the way I set my animation up. Cool beans. Editor config. Editor config, enforce consistent style guide across your entire, across that workspace that you've got open. Like how many characters are you indenting white space for each line? Like how much does a tab? Are you using tabs versus spaces? You can solve this problem with an editor config by enforcing it at a VS Code level. Every time that person hits tab, editor config will say, well, you've said it's got to be spaces. So actually we're putting in 4 spaces. If you're working with a .NET project, the C# language engine, or like formatting engine supports editor config, and you can extend that with C# idioms, but also things like what line endings are we having? I was working with someone the other day, and they were having a problem opening bash files that I'd created because I'd created them in WSL, so they had Linux line endings, but I hadn't put Git attributes. They'd cloned it on Windows, and it had CRLF everywhere, and they were then trying to run it in Docker, and it didn't work. So you can use something like editor config to enforce that. If you're doing stuff with GitHub, GitHub pull requests and issues is kind of a must-have. That allows you to do everything you need to do from with GitHub with inside of works pull requests and issues with inside of VS Code. Let me see if I can find the right editor. Here we go. So I've got that installed in this editor here. If I pop that open, I actually have an outstanding pull request here, so I can double click on that one. No, I can right click on that and open, oh, not open on GitHub. Why isn't it opening when I click on it? Oh, anyway, I can see, I'm not going to fiddle with that, but you can see what files were changed within it. So I've got access to all that there. I can see pull requests that I've made, I've been tagged on, and all that kind of stuff there. I can create new GitHub issues. Where this can become really useful is if you're using this with the to-do highlight extension. So that will help you find to-do items within inside of your workspace. So it just looks for code comments that like whack whack to do. So you can select that and then using the GitHub pull request extension, turn that straight into a GitHub issue. Because every time we put a to-do in there, we totally come back and fix that at some point in our project's lifecycle, don't we? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people actually nodding at that one. A lot more than I would expect. REST client. I think this is like an unsung hero of any project that's doing HTTP endpoints with inside of it that particularly if you're doing it as like a single page application where you are just going to be calling those from like a React or like some kind of JavaScript application. REST client allows you to execute the kinds of things you do with Postman or Insomniac or anything like that, but you write a file that you would then commit as part of that Git repo. So now, again, it's not doing something that you don't already have tools that are capable of doing, but it's bringing it closer to the code. You don't have to make sure you install Postman, make sure you get the Postman collection, import that collection so you can execute them. It just becomes another file within your Git repo that you can open and then execute a HTTP request straight from there. If you're doing GraphQL, it's capable of doing GraphQL as well as normal HTTP calls. Code spell checker. I am a question or comment.
Comment is that every QA I've shown REST client to stops using Postman.
Yeah. So yeah, comment was every QA that sees REST client stops using Postman. Because it's incredibly simple to use, but also has all the power that you get out of any of those other tools. Like I said, it's capable of doing GraphQL if that's the platform that you're doing. If you want to learn more about GraphQL, come to my session tomorrow afternoon. Cross-sell. Code spell checker. I am a horrendous speller. So I remember a project back probably 10 years ago. We were building a database for a custom CRM, and we had to track person name changes. So we created a table code called person name history. Or so we thought. It was actually person name HisTroy. We didn't find out until a few months later. At this point, all of the code was working against person name HisTroy, and it was way too much effort to go back and refactor. So we literally shipped a database table called person name HisTroy, and we had classes that were generated from that. If we had code spell checker, we probably would have got told the error was there and just still ignored it. But it would have told us that it was there, and we would have gone, I'll put a to-do to fix that later on. And the other one that I've got on there is Peacock. Peacock was written by a colleague of mine at Microsoft, and what it does is it allows you to change the shell frame color in VS Code. So if you've got a couple of different VS Code windows open, like I do, at the moment, you can have them colored differently so you can know which one's which. Useful if maybe your back end and your front end are in a separate folders, so you can navigate between those quite easily. If you're a .NET developer, and I might have partially left this in there because we've had a controversial week around .NET development in VS Code, but there is a C# extension for VS Code that is, look, it's not Visual Studio. It's decent enough. It'll get you I use it because it gets me most of the way there in the sorts of things that I need. It'll find symbols. It'll has integration so you can do like Control-Shift-B to build and all that kind of stuff. But the Visual Studio tooling team has announced that there is going to be a new extension coming out that will address some of the challenges that the C# extension currently has. For the one person that is either in the room or watching on the video, Ironide is like the F# extension to use. It is actually the best F# extension that I've ever used, editor experience I've ever used. And I've been doing F# for over a decade now, and yeah, it's like I couldn't not use it anymore. And the last one is IntelliCode. So if you are a Visual Studio user, you might have come across IntelliCode. It's AI-powered code completion and support with inside of VS Code. Not the same as Copilot. It looks at your solution that you're working with and will give you type support and hints around writing code for your code base, as opposed to Copilot, which is genericized editors code completion and support. Actually, who's not seen Copilot in action? Who doesn't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about GitHub Copilot? Ooh, I can do a demo that's hopefully going to steal Damo's thunder from down the back. Are you doing Copilot at all this week, or is Bish doing it? Okay, sweet. I'm not stealing anyone's thunder. Doesn't mean I wasn't going to do it. So Copilot went GA today. So you can. It was in a beta you had to get accepted for, but it's now generally available, and it's called AI-powered programming. So I'm going to just make this a Markdown file, Markdown, and I've got Copilot enabled in this repository. That's a tiny little GitHub icon in the bottom right-hand corner. Now, let's say I'm writing a blog post about Copilot, and then it's starting to, it's giving me help. I'm using the Markdown syntax. Yes, I am. Let's say I'm going to write some JavaScript, and so we're going to do some JavaScript with Markdown because it knows that I'm writing something with Markdown, and it's just going to keep giving me code help along the way. So let's say Markdown dot, there we go, render hello world. Accept. And now I'm out of a job as someone who does a lot of blogging because I've just got an AI that's just going to write blog posts for me. So yeah, AI is going to take over the world. What it's doing is it's using trained AI models from, I forget what it's called, but you can look that up on the docs. It's like Cortex, I think. Codex, that was going to be a second guess. Codex. So it's using inputs probably mostly from public GitHub repos, but other code bases that have been provided to it. It's trained a model, and it will do assumptions around the sorts of things you want. I was actually showing one of my friends who's speaking from Okta, so C#, and we were doing using Okta.SDK, sure. And then we're going to do public class, and there we go. Yep, so that's how we do a new program. And then, let's see, we're going to do client dot, here we go. That's how we're going to get a user. Look at that. Magic. So IntelliCode is similar to this, but it is contextualized around your project. It's available in both Visual Studio and VS Code. This Copilot is available in both VS Code and Visual Studio, as well as JetBrains IDEs if that's your preference. But the other cool thing that you can do with Copilot is, let's say that we've got some code and we don't know what it does. If I can find an editor with code. So who's ever come back to a code base a couple of months later and gone, oh man, what did that do again? Well, with Copilot Labs, let's select some code here. Come to Copilot Labs here, and I'm going to ask it to explain this code. Okay, so it has created a new Cosmos object. It's created a new database object and container, and then created a new data set. Okay, cool. Sure, I could have figured that one out, but it's done a reasonably good job of explaining what that bit of code is, and that's fairly simplistic code. The other thing I could do is and again, I was showing my friend from Okta, and she's like, well, I'm a .NET developer. I'm like, oh, okay, you want this in C#? Here's this code in C#. It's translated that code to C#. It's a bit hit and miss. This is still technical preview. It's just, I guess, more of an illustration of concept of something that it could be doing, and it helps break down the barriers of, I've been reading an article and it's got this really good sample, and it's something I want to look at integrating into our project, but it's all written in Golang, and I don't know Golang. Well, get it to explain the code to me. Translate that to the language that I want to work with, which I think is kind of cool. All right. And let's jump down because I'm aware we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to talk a bit about something that annoys me a lot, or annoyed me a lot more when I was doing consulting work, and that is non-standard environments. I was doing consulting work before I joined Microsoft, and a number of times I would turn up to a new client and they're like, okay, cool, thanks for joining us. We're looking forward for you to help us out. Here's the setup guide for your machine. We'll see you at the end of the week. I'm like, well, it's like 100 pages. Oh yeah, and page 10, you got to go ask this person over there because that's out of date. And then you get 2/3 of the way through and it hasn't worked anyway. No matter, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's right. You need RabbitMQ4, not RabbitMQ3. We need to update that at some point. Who's been in that kind of a situation? You start a new job and you're just like, oh, well, I was going to be productive this month, but I guess not. Or you've come to an open source project and you've found a bug in it and you want to be a good open source citizen and you want to contribute back your fix. So you've done your change, you've submitted a pull request and they've gone, oh, you didn't follow our coding guideline. Well, what was it? Oh, didn't you read the markdown file? I'm like, which one? And then you find it, it's like 5 deep off the contributing guide. That's something that has happened to me on more occasions than I care to recall. And it frustrates me. So a way around this with VS Code is using the dev containers extension. So dev containers allows us to set up a remote environment using Docker on your own local machine. So I've actually been using dev containers for a couple of these projects. So this is a dev container that I've got running here. This is a React application and a GraphQL server all in one, but it's running inside of Docker. So I think this is using like npm 16, whereas on my host machine, I don't even have npm installed. Sorry, Node, I don't have Node installed, whereas this is using Node 16. Because I've set up this environment that if you want to work on this project, you're going to need Node 16. If I come back to this in 6 months' time and and we've moved on to like Node 18 as the default version to go to, well, maybe it will break this. But this environment is sandbox using Docker to be to have the things that I want installed. This particular Git repo that I've got also works with Cosmos DB as the Cosmos DB emulator. So it stands up that emulator. You don't have to install that, but if you want to have a play around with this, you can open it in the remote the dev container, and that will set it all up entirely with the Cosmos emulator running. And if you don't want to use that at the end of the day, you delete the Docker images and the Docker containers, and it's gone. You haven't had to uninstall software. Also, with a dev container, we can configure the extensions that should be loaded. Again, because this particular project, you're going to be working with like Cosmos DB and GraphQL and things like that. I've configured I've set the dev container, which is in this .dev container folder, to have a bunch of preloaded extensions. It has the Docker extension. It has ESLint and Prettier, so that you're getting my coding standards that I've set up for this project. And you haven't even had to like learn what they are. It's just there by default. You'll probably want GraphQL tools to work with this. So it's got the GraphQL extension in there. It's got Cosmos as an extension in there. And now anyone can pick this up and not have to configure their environment for the way that I want them to configure their environment. You don't have to read a 100-page manual of setup machine. You just kind of set it up. It's just kind of set up for you. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to do a quick view of something that you can learn more about on Friday, and that is, well, let's take this idea of an isolated environment to the next level, and let's run it in the cloud. This is that repo from up on GitHub, and it's like, oh, I've noticed a little bug in it, and I want to come across and fix it. Actually, I'm just going to pop that to it. I'm just going to clone this as a new tab so I don't lose that tab. Duplicate tab. Okay, so yeah, I found like a spelling mistake in the README file. Or I want to add a README file. If I press dot, I end up at github.dev. Github.dev is, well, this is actually VS Code. Or it's a very slimmed down version of VS Code, running entirely within inside of the browser. Now, I don't have access to things like the terminal. I can't run an npm command or anything like that, but I can go to, let's go to the GraphQL file that's in here. I can load that up, and now I can work with that. Now, it doesn't load all the extensions. There are some extensions will work in github.dev. Obviously, the GraphQL one doesn't, but TypeScript does. Syntax highlighting. All within the browser. And this can be a more efficient way to navigate around a code base. You want to explore a GitHub repo that someone's got. You can just poke around inside of that by opening the files rather than navigating back and forth within inside of the browser and using the GitHub's built-in editor. But we could go one step further, and that is with GitHub Codespaces. So there's a full session on Friday that a friend down the back, Damien from GitHub, is going to be talking about Codespaces. But this is an editor entirely within the browser, and it is VS Code fully running in the browser in like a completely remote environment, to the point where I can do control backtick to open up the terminal. Let me zoom that in a touch more. And let's say I want to go npm run dev backend. So I'm going to start up the backend web server, which is my GraphQL server in this particular project. So it's starting, it's running NodeMon, it's compiling my TypeScript down, it's setting up a file system watcher because that's what NodeMon's doing. There we go, it's made it available. It has actually found some TypeScript errors that I've got within inside of there, but my API is available at localhost 4000 API/GraphQL. But whose localhost? Like, is it mine? Let's control click on that. And now, we give it a second. It's errored out because I think I've timed. Oh, no, I haven't timed out my login process. That has actually tried to open up a URL, but I really should have done npm run run dev on the front end. And now this will also open up another. So this is now running a separate web server within inside of my GitHub code space. Again, same repo that I had locally. And there's the URL I want. Another localhost endpoint. Here we go, connect to my forwarded port. I'm hoping that it shouldn't have timed out the connection because code spaces should have been offline if it had timed out. But come on, we've got like 3 minutes left and I want this last demo to work. Come on, did I sacrifice enough to the demo gods beforehand? It stopped spinning. That's not a good sign, is it? 1, 2, go. Anyway, so what GitHub's doing is it's creating a proxy server that sits in front of, well, your local host. Hey, GitHub's down. It's not my problem. Let's give it another reload. Yeah, okay, so that is something with GitHub being down. Anyway, Damien's doing a full Codespaces talk at the end on Friday, so go check that out if you want to learn more about Codespaces. But ultimately, this is a fully running dev environment in the cloud. I have not had to install anything locally for it to work, and it just works normally. Trust me on that. All right, we've got about 2 minutes to go. So there is one final thing with what I want to talk about with VS Code. And that is something that I am way too old to deal with, and that's TikTok. Did you know that VS Code has a TikTok account? They do. TikTok.com/@VS Code, they have a TikTok account. They put up videos constantly that just show little tips and tricks like I've been doing today of working with VS Code. There's like some really cool things in there, and some just generalized things that you'd find on TikTok where you watch this and you're like, I don't understand. I'm too old for this. But yeah, there's a heap of cool little 1 minute tricks that you can go check out on there, and it's a lot of fun, and yeah, if that's your jam at least. So that is pretty much all that I've got time for today. Looking at my watch there, we're just coming up to the hour. There is so many things that I didn't get time to cover off today. I didn't even show that you could debug code. It's an editor with a debugger in there, and I didn't even get to debug code in it. You can use VS Code as the diff tool for just within Git. I use that, so if I'm doing something in Visual Studio, it will still launch VS Code to do my diffing because that's set as the default diff engine. There is ways that you can customize the command line to launch different profiles with different sets of extensions loaded on bare metal, and more things that I could ever cover in a 1 hour session. But that is all we've got time for today. Thank you for hanging out with me and hopefully learning a few more things to make your life even more amazing with VS Code. Enjoy the rest of NDC Melbourne.